All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Whew. Do we not have a hot show for you guys tonight? As always on Liberty and Friends, I'm not alone. I'm always joined by the Friends panel, a revolving door of key thinkers, guys who are on the spectrum, if you will, of libertarians, liberals, conservatives, and indeed some anarchists here and there who basically will give you the analysis and views that you genuinely will not get anywhere else. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Remember, you also are a part of the Friends panel week after week because your comments as they come in thick and through, thick and thin is the expression, but rather what I meant to say is as your comments come in through thickly, that is, they will be flighted on screen. So make sure, please, your comments are on this, you get your comments in, pardon me, whether you're watching the simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter. Now, with that being said, once again, thank you, folks, for joining us. Your price of admission. The only thing you need to do as you join the show is to, of course, hit that like button. Do it right now, whether you're watching the simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter. And hey, if you're watching on YouTube in particular, guys, do me a solid favor. Subscribe to the channel. There is a growing number of you, indeed about 1,800, if I'm not mistaken, since the beginning of January who have joined the subscriber list. Help me reach that goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And hey, you can support the work that we do here on the channel. As I see myself frozen on screen, I think I'm back. There we go. You can find us, of course, at BigDaddyLiberty.com. There you can find a payment method that suits you, and anything between 50 to 100 Rand. 75 Rand is about the average that we get from people per month. And it really does support the work that we do, especially as we gear up to hitting the road again, advocating for those liberty ideas. I'm talking free markets, the idea of a free, prosperous, non-racial, and property-owning South Africa, the very thing that our political edifice in this country despise. They hate a free country. They hate a free nation of faith, flag, and family type society. They hate that. They absolutely despise that. They want you, anyway, let me not go down this train of thought because, as I said, I'm not alone. Every Sunday evening, I bring you the Friends panel who help me dissect and analyze the news week that was by looking at the top headlines. This week on Liberty and Friends, we focus in on the crime picture. Of course, the crime stats released on Thursday, and the statistics pointing a shocking state of affairs. Again, nothing you didn't know, because unlike a certain asshat of a police minister, you don't live safely ensconced behind high walls with a army of private security around you. You don't have that luxury. Your family doesn't have that luxury. You face the wolves on a day-to-day basis of the petty criminals right up to the criminal elites in this country. And it is those criminals who are ruling the roost. As the title of the show says, it is those criminals who are quite literally laughing at the South African police services as they literally kill us, steal from us, rape us, and indeed do any other form of crime that violates our life, our liberty, and our property rights. That's the conversation, sadly, we're going to have tonight as we unpack the numbers, helping you have a stronger sense of what is happening. Now, enough with that jibber jabber, enough with that waffling. How about I get into my guests this evening? Let's begin with the fellas who grace us over at the Manpatria podcast. I'm talking, of course, about Dumo, Denga, who is the host of the show. Prati, good evening, Baba. How are you?
Good evening, Sihle. And as always, it's always great to be here and always looking forward to having a great conversation here. Thank you.
Absolutely. His other leg of the three-legged poiky pot that I often like to describe the Manpatria podcast is Koketso, Resane. Brake, Eitana.
Yeah, I was starting to think that maybe I need a deeper voice to be called Brake. So, yeah, otherwise it's good to be back. Yeah, it's been a minute, but we're here.
Absolutely. As I'm experiencing some lag on my side. So what I'll do is let me introduce everybody, and then Dumo, I'll have you take over for a second whilst I fix my stream. She is, of course, hailing out of the Barrow or Paarl in the Western Cape. She is a marketing specialist, someone who I think you should get in touch with when you need those sort of services. And of course, here's the interesting part, the juicier part. She has her own show, the Nolu Maki podcast. Make sure, please, you catch her on YouTube and subscribe to her show. Nolu Maki, there she is. Nolu, hello.
Hey, Sihle. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the great show tonight. I think we lost Sihle.
I think so too.
Yeah, it's something you said.
Yeah, and then here's Gideon.
Well,
Yes, thank you.
I presume Sisha would have done some sort of introduction, so I'm just going to skip ahead on it and say I am sitting in darkness as a living metaphor of the current state of the Republic of South Africa and the poor citizens that are forced to live in it. And it's nice to be here, and this is an awesome topic. And unfortunately, I think I'd like to call him my counterpart. Ian Cameron is supposed to join us, but I do believe he is having also massive security issues. I mean, not security issues, electricity issues. And my own battery is unfortunately going to die in probably the next 45 minutes. So I'll try to be an impact player. But guys, it's great to see you. Dumo, Koketso, Nolu. I didn't know you had your own show. You've just gotten another subscriber.
Thank you.
I'm keen to check it out.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's begin the show while Sihle actually gets his stuff sorted out. Hopefully he'll join very soon. So, okay, guys. So the topic of today's show, it's basically South Africa's crime. It's off the charts. It's getting worse. And clearly this is something that is of concern. So I just want to just give you some high-level stats, and then we can just dive deeper into it. So if you look at the latest crime stats, when you look at the last quarter compared to the quarter before, contact crimes increased by 11.6%, contact-related crimes increased by effectively 2%, and property-related crimes increased by 7.2%, and other serious crimes increased by 10.6%. Now, guys, when crime increases, clearly this is something that we should be concerned about, because there's many causes for this, but really it just shows that, well, if there's more crimes being committed, I think criminals are gaining more confidence and saying, well, look, perhaps, there are no consequences for this. Let's just do the deed, if you want to put it that way. Chances are, even if we do get caught, we might even get released anyway, because we can pay the cops off and stuff like that. Gideon, we'll start with you since your battery is on life support. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think you nailed it, Dumo, and I'll quickly summarize. So the crime stat a lot of people are concerned about is homicide or murder. If you look at the latest crime statistics, and look, I took a look at the past 4 quarters. If we just look at the latest one, the last quarter, we're on track for 30,000 murders a year. That would roughly give us a intentional homicide rate of 50 murders per 100,000 people. That puts us comfortably in the number 1 position globally, like easily, far past Jamaica, far past Honduras, El Salvador, Venezuela, all the other ones. We would be the most homicidal nation on earth, and it would also give us a homicide rate we last saw in 1999. And to put that into perspective, we came down from 60 odd homicides per 100,000 people in the early 90s at the height of the post-apartheid transition, when there was a huge amount of political violence in this country that was driving that homicide rate. We came down past 50 per 100,000 people, all the way down to the low 30s. And we're heading back to what we last saw, jeepers, 24 years ago. That's where we're heading. And it's been increasing every single year since 2011. This is not a new trend. So the question is why? What's behind this? And I can explain it very carefully. The collapse and failure of policing in the criminal justice system that started in just after the 2010 FIFA World Cup and got as bad that in 2018, the then National Commissioner, which is Kekla Sitole, admitted to Parliament that the National Crime Prevention Strategy had collapsed and it was impossible, his exact words, for the SAPS to fulfill their constitutional mandate. That admission came long after the fact, right? Things had been grave before October 2018. This has created a colossal security vacuum. And what happens? What does nature do in a vacuum? It fills it. And in this case, the criminals exploited that vacuum fully, which resulted in the fact that South Africa has one of the biggest and fastest growing organized crime levels in the world. And you're seeing it manifest in things like the Zamas that are running around with belt-fed PKM machine guns that they got somehow from across our borders. You're seeing it in the cash and transit syndicates. You're seeing it in the truck hijacking syndicates. You're seeing it in the construction mafia, which is a major problem. You're seeing it in the taxi mafia. You're seeing this growth of this organism, this organized crime juggernaut that's becoming a parallel state. Okay, everyone goes, oh, parallel states are impossible. We already have that. The mafia state with all these different organizations are a parallel economy in a parallel state. They have force projection capacity that they're doing area denial to the police and the government that are effective no-go areas. They have created a second country within our country, and they are projecting force into the communities where rule of law still exists because of this vacuum. And they've succeeded also in co-opting law enforcement. They're politically connected. There was a thing out from the Western Cape provincial government bemoaning the fact that some of the top people, if not most, of Western Cape provincial SAPS has been captured by gangs. We know entire police stations have been captured by gangs and Zamas. And last thing, just to talk about the construction mafia, because I'm just sketching a big picture thing here. I spoke to people that are involved in the industry that were intimidated at their building sites by guys with guns that said, hey, you better give us 30% of your project, right? Or else. So they go to the local police station to lay a criminal case or open a criminal case. They're told, no, that ain't happening here. So they phone the station commander to complain, and she says, listen, you park your car behind the station, you come in through the back door, back gate, go up the stairs, speak to nobody, come straight to my office. He rocks up there. Station commander says, listen, what's your problem? Tells the story, and the station commander points at the wall where there's photos of people, and she says, I do not trust a single person working in my charge office. The moment you open a case, those people whose faces on that wall will know about it within 5 minutes. They'll know the registration of your car. They know where you live. They'll know your ID number. They know what color car you drive. And I can do absolutely nothing about it. And that is not an isolated case. I've heard of many such cases of police stations across the country. So we're sitting with state failure causing this incredible rise in crime with the subsequent increase in violence. And when you said it's cheap, that there's no meaningful consequences, you're right. Our prosecution rate for murder is less than 15%. For rape, it's less than 9%. For trio crimes, that's hijackings, robbery of business premises, robbery of residential premises, is less than 3%. So your chances as an armed robber of going to jail is less than 3%. It means you have a 97% chance of getting away with it. I mean, what meaningful consequence is there to it? Violence is cheap. And anyway, I've said my bit. Let me shut up for a second.
Let me come in here and thank Dumo for holding the fort. Let's try that again. There we go, I think. Yes, much better. Gideon, even as I listen to this, there are a lot of nested features, a lot of data you've put out here that really will speak to what we need to unpack tonight. Because as I said in the intro, the crime picture in this country, the only person who pretended they were surprised, the only person who pretended as if, oh, we didn't foresee this because, oh, we totally invested policing resources to stem this increase in crime, were the likes of the political elites in this country, and the people who still pretend as though the state is in charge of the affairs, or rather in charge of law and order in this country. That simply is a fugazi. It's false, as you've painted out. They are very organized criminal syndicates in this country who have dabbled in various things. Some even, if I can use business terminology, diversifying their portfolios. Why do drugs only if you're Cape gangsters when you can also head into property, specifically muscling in on construction sites, shooting up even these sites, intimidating guards and killing officials, as was the case last week. Let's take a moment, Gideon, and maybe focus on the syndicate, or this alternative economy, if you will, of a criminal elite who are more structured, well, better structured rather, than the SAPS, more motivated than the SAPS, and indeed at times well armed, better armed rather, than the SAPS. When you look at the Zamazamas, for example, where does one even begin to try and break these networks? And what do they look like right now?
So a lot of the time these networks aren't well integrated and they can be quite localized. And some are very well integrated. And as you previously mentioned, there's overlap between them, taxi mafias and other mafias, and even Zamazangas. I mean, when you look at the tavern killings, right, that was headline news. I couldn't find evidence that even a single one of them was anything other than a mafia-style hit by an organized crime group, right? And I mean, there were police officers and even a high-ranking ex-Hawks official that took part in those things. Subsequently, it came out. So here you have, and this is a thing that happens, right? Zamazamas often act as hitmen for other organized criminal groups and vice versa, because they all have other economic interests. Some of them invest in businesses, some of them have protection rackets, extortion rackets, and sometimes they need to project force in order to, ply their trade. Either take out rivals, intimidate people that aren't playing along, or, do what bad criminals do. So this almost trade in violence has become a feature. It's not a bug. Just let me segue for a second. What frustrates me is every time we have these high-profile violent incidents, we have this sort of national conversation that lasts about 48 to 72 hours about more gun control legislation. I'm just tearing my hair out. I'm like, we've established what the problem is. We have a research paper from the Wits School of Governance telling us exactly that gun control legislation is irrelevant and our rates of violent crime is directly impacted by our strength and levels of policing, which is the major element that's failing here. Now, a mistake we often make is we keep asking the state to fix policing when there are two realities here. The one, the state is very often part of the criminal problem, whether we like to admit that on air or not. And secondly, the police may well be at a point beyond which it is savable. It may have passed that event horizon a long time ago by the sheer degree it's hemorrhaged its high quality human capital, its experienced folks, the way that its inventory and capital equipment has just eroded, how it doesn't have the funding to keep itself going and has mismanaged that hugely, the low levels of public trust in it, and just the fact that it's become a sick organization that might be incurable. So if we realistically admit that the SAPS may not be savable, then the question we should be asking is, what do we do now? Where are the solutions? And my suggestion is we look at solutions from the private sector, paralleling what the state is doing. And the law allows you to do a lot of that. It doesn't empower you to the same extent it allows the police, but it empowers you to act with force where necessary, and it empowers you to coordinate your community safety organizations and your community response. So it starts again with community resilience. But what I found the problem with community resilience is 90% of the times it is wholly uncoordinated. And we have all the resources, we have the skills, the talent, the equipment, we have the mandates, we have all these things, but it's not coordinated. It almost is siloed and is just, everyone is just trying to fight their little battle where they can. And that's fine. That's much better than doing nothing. But if we're going to take on the far bigger problem of this organized crime monster in South Africa, then we need to get organized and we need to get coordinated and we need to start investigating our options, because there are many and they're doable. But we can't just sit on our arse and hope that somehow one day St. Cyril the Brave wakes up and he finds his spine in some cupboard somewhere and says, cool, I'm going to fight Zele and I'm going to put some dude in charge of federalizing policing and breaking it down, and we're going to put a special task force together like the Untouchables that broke Al Capone, and we're going to go after these guys one at a time in the middle of the night, and we're going to make sure they get prosecuted, and we're going to make sure they pay for it, and we're going to just dismantle these organizations from the top down or bottom up. That's what needs to happen. That's precisely what's not going to happen if we wait for government to do it.
Even as I said this, there were flash in the pan moments where something like that was happening. Let me be precise and specific. There was a time for those of us who are KZN residents where we had a slight reprieve from the most violent gangsters, the most violent, thuggish, big-time criminals. And why? Because we had a unit out in Cato Manor that was operating. It was called a hit squad by the media. It was called all sorts of things. But in real terms, what it really was feared by some of the most hardened criminals in the country. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the merits of its tactics and blah, blah, blah. But I'll definitely say this. Some of the most hardened killers in this province were literally shaking in their boots. They themselves were running to police stations asking for protection from this particular unit. And why? Because this unit was cleaning up. And it did so without fear and without favor. There were body bags of criminals piling up versus body bags of ordinary citizens. And it's that unit, to speak to your point, Gideon, which was disbanded by the politicians in this country. They cited all sorts of reasons. Oh, it's a hit squad, they said. That was proven in court to be gefuffel, as you'll say in Afrikaans. It was a bought for unit on behalf of, what was his name, General Boyson, if I'm not mistaken. A rogue unit, they said. Absolute nonsense, as we found. But I'll come back to this in a moment. I want to have everybody else have say. I'm apologizing to the rest of my panel here. Guys, Koketso, let me come to you. Because even as I do that, let me open up that article I said I'm going to use as just the backbone, a framework, if you will, for my conversation. Here's the asshat police minister appearing before our screens with this asshat deputy. For some reason, that hat is a dress code in the Ministry of Police in this country. Very weird. But nonetheless, at the release of the crime stats, that's for the third quarter of 2022, said that 7,555 murders were recorded during the period, marking a 10% increase year on year. Koketso. Let's take a moment with everybody just to talk about murder. This country is awash with blood, Koketso. As I mentioned in a previous episode of Vuganazo this week, it seems as though South Africa is a country of, on the one hand, hitmen, and on the other, actual mass murderers.
Yeah, and it's quite scary, actually. We are probably fast approaching a scenario where it does make more sense, I would say, to not just rely on private security, but the same criminal elements who commit murder. You know, we're fast approaching a point in time where the same criminal elements will start effectively offering protection services. Now, where it gets really bad is criminals who extort money, either legitimately or illegitimately, from people for protection. Even they'll probably be more effective at keeping you safe and sleeping, snoring safely at night than the actual police would. We're getting to that point, and that's one of the conversations no one actually wants to have, is that, you know, the reason mafia communities exist is because it's not because there are criminals looking to be entrepreneurs in, you know, squeezing money out of communities. One of the reasons they succeed is that the actual local or provincial, in our case, even national law enforcement is inept. You know, so it does make more sense for people to voluntarily pay criminal elements protection fees. And we're getting to that point. There's going to be those who are protected or not protected, of course. And what that does is actually speak into the grandiose failure of the South African Police Service to actually execute on their mandate. Now, again, we see the stats come out of rising murder rates, particularly. It's not just murder. It's actually, I believe most categories have gone worse year on year. But as all of this happens, there isn't a single key political figure who's really going to decide in the way that an Ian Cameron or Gideon Joubert would, to say, right, let's actually take this on. You know, all of them will be bickering over political relationships, over coalition governments at key municipalities, etc., while people are actually dying on the street. So even then, the political solution or the political will to come to a solution doesn't actually exist. And this is exactly why the police minister, the current one, still enjoys the benefits of being a minister, traveling with a protection detail that includes blue light vehicles that bully people off the road, etc. They enjoy safety while everyone else is effectively on their own. And if we don't address this soon, it is going to start making sense to say, right, perhaps I should pay the bullies, the men who look dangerous out on the street to actually keep me safe, because it will make logical Maslow hierarchical sense to do so.
You know what frightens me, Koketso, even as you say that, and you raise an important point. Those who have the means in this country, those who have the financial means in this country, are doing that already. Let me be precise and specific. Take a drive into my township here of Umlazi, and there's a common area called V section. Everybody has to pass V section in order to get to any other section in Umlazi. 1 million people live here. You will see a collection, a gaggle, I don't know how to describe them, a group of various individuals, some of them taxi owners, some of them woofy business people. These are legitimate people in most cases, in most cases. But we have had to resort to exactly that. When you have these security companies where out hop these young men, heavily armed, no bulletproof vests, there's nothing professional looking about them, except the fact that they're carrying high-powered semi-automatic rifles, arming around, and they'll just sit openly in the area. They've gone one step further. They now have their own, the taxi associations. And again, I don't say this as a pejorative to them, because I understand the industry they operate in and the necessity for it. But nonetheless, they have their own protection services called Hlokomela, where they literally police themselves now, because they recognize that SAPS and Durban Metro, for example, has completely failed them. Let me show you a good example. When there were recent service delivery protests here in Umlazi, and there were people blocking the roads, violently stoning cars and the like, SAPS were nowhere to be seen in responding to that. And instead, it was a Hlokomela company, a private security company that is owned by the tax association, that came and dispersed these people and actually protected life, liberty, and property rights. Now, I'm not saying these guys are absolutely, above board. I have no idea as to whether they are or not. But that's the image that people are now seeing, that you've got to pay for your own security in this country. Nolu, let me come to you. I'll come back to Dumo after that.
Sure. This is something which in Cape Town, I think the whole Western Cape, most townships that we live like that, where you find that you have to pay a certain group to protect you, even for small things such as the fact that when you're coming from work, you need to be covered, or rather someone needs to accompany you, something like that. I know here to Stembekweni that if somebody stole anything from you, you go to a particular group of people, not the police station. For that matter, I was told that the police, they are scared of those guys. So if you want anything of yours, if you've got anything that happens to you, you have to go to them and then it will get solved. So at the moment I'd say it's already there, where you find that we live by the fact that you need to pay the mafias, because that group of people, they aren't necessarily what you're talking about, Sihle. It's a group of people which actually they themselves are gangsters. Themselves, they used to rob, not even used to, they continue to do so. So in other words, they are given that that honor in the community to say that at least they're protecting us. So it's a norm now in certain communities for us to live like that. And because of that, I think it actually shows one thing for me, that as a society we become cowards, because when you allow someone who was terrorizing and making you feel unsafe in your community, and then you ask him again, how about you protect me? It sounds so stupid. And the fact, and because of that, I think it will continuously become the norm of our communities, that the bad guy, don't you dare try and fight and protect yourself against them, but rather negotiate your life with them. Unfortunately, that's how we live in our communities right now. And I think the better way to do that, of course, is to arm yourself. Like I showed you on Twitter, that you need to have some kind of a protection for yourself, especially as a woman, because nobody's coming to save you. Just now, today, I was cycling and my tire burst. And I could see there were funny guys that were coming, and I was actually getting scared. But thank be, there were some guys who came into my protection, because it's a community and we know each other. So for me, I just think that when you've got that kind of community, then in that way you can be protected. But I also had my pepper spray with me, so I knew that if anything can happen to me, I've got something that I can protect myself with, because I know very well that those guys will beat the hell out of me. But at least I can try to protect myself. So for me, I think I'd say it's already there, Sihle, but also we just need to arm ourselves in however way we can do that. Our communities are led by bad guys who are protecting us.
Dumo, I'm going to come to you in a moment. But I'm just mindful of the fact that Gideon has battery issues. He literally has, let's call it 8 minutes left with us. Gideon, I raised this particular topic of how South Africa's elites, rich folks of whatever stripe, are outsourcing their security, not trusting the SAPS, but to these private security guys. And it looks different for different types of people, for the taxi industry in particular. And I see it from both perspectives. These guys, let's not mince words here. The taxi industry is very dangerous and they have to resort to protecting themselves. Often how they do this can be dubious. And I know you have your complaints around that. But as I said, it's a double-edged sword in that sense, but the bottom line is really this. The ordinary South African simply cannot afford that. We are on our own.
So I actually have large sympathy with the taxi industry, the legitimate elements of it. I understand the complete minefield that industry is as a legitimate player, because as much as some people see as a predator, there's always a bigger fish that's coming for you. And when we look at what these let's talk about the syndicates, the organized criminals, and the street criminals. Okay, they are resource predators. They look scary and intimidating because they are used to violence. They're happy to use it, and normal, polite folk just aren't wired that way generally. But they also bleed. They also breathe oxygen. They also die. They also get scared, and they're not a hydra. It's not a case of one head gets chopped off and automatically another one pops up. That's not quite how it works. When we look at the challenges faced by ordinary people in community, your strength lies in your community safety structures, which is why they're so vitally important that you put them in place. And this is not just, neighborhood watches and CPFs. This goes far deeper. It's wonderful to have a talk shop with the cops and have a community safety plan and you hold them accountable. It's a whole different story. You say, okay, but how does this translate into an organization with teeth? And there are various legal ways you can structure this. But for, the most effective community safety organization I've seen is in the township just outside Milnerton. And it's township folk with bibs and shamboks. And they warn you twice on a Friday night. If you are not behaving and you're suspicious and you don't vacate the area, they just they give it to you, right? They speak twice and then the shambok speaks on the third time. And it worked. It might not be a particularly humane, in inverted commas, because we're beyond that conversation, method pertaining to preserving human dignity. But I'm sorry, human dignity comes a distant second place when you're living in the most murderous country in the world, right? And where communities have taken active measures to protect themselves, it has worked. And when you effectively coordinate all those efforts together, you can turn your little hard point of community resilience into like an island and an island chain of resilience. And when you start linking these different island chains together, you start creating continents and areas of resilience and safety and security. So you make the bubble bigger, you throw the walls out. Our biggest challenge is apathy in people. They still want the government, asking the government, who is probably complicit in this, to fix things. And that's not going to happen. We need to look at parallel private solutions that do exist, and they don't have to cost a lot of money. I have huge conversations with more affluent areas where they are trying to create a security bubble just for themselves. And that's a great step one. But I say you need to think about this as you're fighting an insurgent, right? But as opposed to an insurgent that's blowing him up or setting IEDs because they're an effect predator, they're committing their violent acts to have an effect. These are resource predators. If you want to be safe in your neighborhood, you need to target these guys where they are and where they are embedded in poorer and township communities, and you need to take hands with the people in those communities to help their community safety structures become more effective. You need to bolster them, you need to give them more resources, you need to help guide them, and you need to coordinate with them. And when you start doing stuff like that, then you're going to find your area is going to be a hell of a lot safer, because the embedded criminals across the wrong side, right, of the railway track are no longer welcome in those areas where they previously used to embed themselves. And you're cutting how shall we say this, right? You're cutting them right in the core. You're not just hacking away at limbs. So that is a bare bones way of doing it. But what this will take is people stop waiting for government to fix it. We need to
Absolutely.
dig our own trenches, and we need to start speaking the same language. And I think we all do.
Absolutely. And again, just for the sake of the audience, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We come to you every Sunday at 8 p.m. This is the panel this week. We've got in studio Dumo Denga, host of the Manpatria show, his co-host, Koketso Resane, Nolu Maki, host of the Nolu Maki podcast. Make sure you find her on social media and rather on YouTube, pardon me. A blonde moment there for a moment. And of course, Gideon Joubert, who's not going to be with us much longer. You can thank load shedding and ESCOM for that. But we have him for the next 5 minutes, maybe, and we'll utilize him as much as possible in those next 5 minutes. But Dumo, let me come to you. And even as I do that, let me reopen that particular article from Business Tech that wrote up these crimes. Sexual offenses up 9.6%. We're talking of things like rape, up by 9.8%, pardon me. Sexual assault, 4.1%, and other attempted sexual offenses. Look at that, 45.6% increase. Attempted crime saw a year-on-year increase, rising by 24%. Common robbery up by 21%. Common assault, 12%. And indeed, the numbers here do more overall, painting a picture of, let's be frank, crime being out of control. Dumo, here's the bottom line here. There is a criminal elite in this country who are literally targeting law-abiding South Africans, squeezing us on the issue of life, liberty, and rights. And here you have a certain Begitsele saying, oh, don't worry about it. We're totally on top of it. In fact, we fired 46 dirty cops, and we're reintroducing specialized units. The same party, quick bookmark. He's from the same party. Indeed, was around at the same time when the ANC took a decision to disband specialized units and to make the police a unitary unit, as they used to call it. Every cop should be able to deal with every issue, they used to tell us back then, in further justification of getting rid of the scorpions, if you'll remember. Dumo, surely addressing crime outside of what Gideon said also begins with getting rid of the ANC.
Yes, Sitla, I agree with that. I think that the government in this case, it appears that they have created the problem now where we have rising crime levels. So I think that's actually, I think that's a good point. I think another thing that also needs to be spoken about, I think now that it's reached this stage, whether if SAPS can be saved or not, is probably a difficult question to answer. But assuming that it cannot be saved, clearly people need to take protection in their own hands. And I think what works is social pressure. I think social pressure is a great way to actually get order in a society. You'll find that the reason why criminals tend to take over is because that social pressure does not exist. And the social pressure actually comes from the criminals themselves, because they have they have arms, they have power, and some of them have the police in their pockets. So I think social pressure is a good way of just disincentivizing criminals from performing certain activities. As you mentioned earlier, you said with the reprieve in KZN, where there were actually body bags of criminals, and then some of these criminals actually running to the police saying, hey, man, please protect me. Now, I'm not saying we should go that far, but I'm just saying that there has to be that sort of resistance as well, in terms of just saying, okay, you know what? If the police are not going to help us, then we're going to protect ourselves. We're going to get our own guns or our own security or our own way of doing things, which can actually help. So and also going back to Begitsele as well. I mean, I really think, for me, I gave up on the government a long time ago. So I don't even know what he even says about certain things anymore. So it's just like, yeah, he can say whatever he wants, but we know what the deal is. Guys, we are on our own. And, whatever Begitsele says, it's not going to change anything. The previous police commissioner, forgot his name, said that it was impossible for SAPS to complete or to fulfill its mandate. That was in 2018, 2019. that already should have rang alarm bells to people. So I think, in my opinion, I'm not saying that now you should go out and take on criminals and, try to be a John Wick. No, please don't do that. Just think about this thing a bit, just be smart, right? Okay. Just be smart about it, because John Wick leaves a lot of bodies, right? And you don't want to be, in a situation where you've got a lot of criminal or murder charges against you because you want it to be a hero, right? And also you get old and frail, so you can't do it forever. So be smart, be strategic, understand the situation, look at the taxi industry. They understand their situation and created a solution to that problem. And now some may question it, whether if it's legit or not, and that's fine, but at least they saw the problem, they tried to solve it. And we need to have that same mentality when it comes to security. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to Gideon and then Koketso, only because of Gideon's battery issues. But shout out to John Wick in Mamelodi, man. we had a John Wick out in Mamelodi, and he was cleaning out the gangsters according to residents in that part of the world. But Gideon, let me give you a final word, because I'm sure your battery is now teetering. Speak to me. We've spoken about the organized crime, we've spoken about the syndicates, we've spoken about, but there's a conversation to be had about SAPS itself, the fundamental structures of SAPS themselves, why they fail us, and why effectively, as you said earlier on, one shouldn't look to the SAPS to deal with this crime monster that we have. From the level of a minister to the actual management to police station management, why is it so effed up?
So it's very simple, right? Centralized policing is doomed to fail, especially so in a country with the geographic diversity and size of South Africa, where you have 11 different tribes speaking different languages, where we have high density urban metros that, with urban sprawl, urban decay, with all sorts of socioeconomic development and, from the most impoverished to the wealthiest rubbing shoulders, to extreme rural areas with different challenges, to abalone poaching, to rhino poaching, to farm attacks, to human trafficking, to rape, to murder, to drug trafficking. It's absolutely ludicrous to think that the policing needs in Durban can be the same as rural KZN, the same as rural Northern Cape, the same as rural Limpopo, the same as Cape Town City Bowl, the same as Buffalo City, and that this can be centrally managed somehow with a national policing strategy is just the stupidest idea ever. The fact is the SAPS shouldn't exist. It should be dissolved completely. Policing should be federalized all the way down to community level, whether that's canton police or community, county sheriff's departments, or whatever model we want to follow, where the police are directly accountable to the community living there, where we return to the Pelian principles of policing, where the community consents to being policed because it trusts the police and it buys into the concept of rule of law. Where those things are missing, those fundamental building blocks, it isn't going to work. What we're trying to do is we're trying to force policing into communities from the top down, and then we're still allowing that same police that's being forced to be criminally infiltrated and co-opted. That is a recipe for complete bloody disaster, and we're seeing the fruits of that tree right now today, like in those crime stats and where we're going. So we have completely the wrong model. It's not even, you can't even reform it. You can't fix it. I know I talk about fixing policing all the time, but I don't mean about fixing the SAPS. I don't think the SAPS is fixable. We need to replace it with a completely new thing. And obviously the ANC government will never let go on that, because being commies centralize everything. They would centralize your toilet paper procurement if you give them half a bloody chance, right? So obviously these are the bright sparks that cannot buy things over condoms during lockdown. Of course they're not going to win with policing. They have no idea what they're doing. They're fundamentally stupid. We need to return this thing down to a model that actually works. And unfortunately, South Africa never had a policing model that really did work. I know we say a lot of things about the previous model, but bear in mind the SAP was not really so much a police force as it was an organ of state violence. And it used the violence very effectively to keep everything down. But in a country where we do believe in freedom, that model is not going to work. However, other models do work. But we cannot pursue this idea that Pretoria has the answers. And on that bombshell, I'm about to croak. Well, my computer's about to croak. I'm hopefully still going to carry on. But this is a very good discussion. I'm hoping that what I'm saying makes sense, and I will catch all of you on the flip side. But Sishe, thanks for the invite. Dumo, Koketso, Nolu, I'll subscribe to your podcast. It's been great, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
As I was saying, absolutely. That is, of course, Gideon Joubert, Paratus.info. Please, man, make sure you check out his website, his content at Paratus.info. His details are in the descriptor of the video. Guys, we're in that last, let's call it 25 minutes, 22 minutes or so of the show. And I think Gideon has given us quite a few nuggets here. Okay, so I must come to you because you and I have had this conversation before. And this is where I become a little controversial and maybe unpopular with certain people who praise and worship politicians. Let me lay it out this way. You know, Koketso, we've had a talk in the past where I've questioned the rationale of giving Pretoria, giving the likes of Obo Begicele, Cyril Ramaphosa, national government effectively, control over a policing force, I call it a force, not a service, which is clearly broken at the core. If you look at the very structure of SAPS within it, there are complaints from ordinary men and women in blue about their management, how their management simply are absolutely inept, do not know what they're doing, and it's creating a despondency, a sense of despair from that hard-working cop, that guy who dons that bulletproof vest, who puts that service pistol on and literally goes out of their home not knowing if they'll come back in order to face society's wolves on behalf of us. If I keep with that same analogy, we're sheep, but nonetheless, for the purposes of this conversation, it's that cop who's being failed fundamentally by the likes of a useless police minister and a cadre-deployed, top-heavy police management structure that simply doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that it's very top-heavy. I forget the numbers now, but someone had posted them earlier in the week. I believe it was Ian Cameron who said there's over 200 generals, over 600 brigadiers, give or take, and yet the entire SAPS is outright incompetent. And we've had this conversation again, you know, that I'm fully with you here, that we need to but we need to outright decentralize the police service, all the way from the bottom, all the way to the top. I don't even like how recruitment is handled. You know, the whole thing of you go to a police college and at the end of the day, you have very little say in terms of where you are actually deployed. You can get separated from the community you grew up in, the community you care about, to end up serving in another part of the country with complete strangers, sometimes even facing something like a language barrier. No, these are all the hallmarks of central control or central planning from the top. It doesn't work, and especially doesn't work in a country with 60 million odd people. And the sheer size that South Africa, in terms of square kilometers, the sheer size of South Africa and the number of provinces, of course. We don't have a monoculture in this country. We have 11 official languages, 12 if you include sign language. Very diverse people, very diverse landscape, large distance between, you know, the three biggest cities, between all of them. All of this is a lot to then decide that it's a good idea to centralize it. So we absolutely need to decentralize it, if not for administrative reasons, so that there's a little bit more control at least at the local level. If not for that reason, then simply because, simply so you can actually put policemen who care in the communities they care about, so they can actually, you know, those who are so-called bad apples take their job a little bit more seriously. So yeah, I like that you brought up the tweet there. Yeah, 200 generals plus, 600 plus brigadiers, quite a lot of money being sent from Treasury to the policing service here, and yet you and I still have to rely on private security and community groups and community WhatsApp groups to actually stay safe or do something regarding the protection of person property, and of course your community at large. So Yeah, staggering numbers. And again, no one is actually putting Cyril, at least in Parliament, no one is actually putting Cyril to task over this. We can sit here and talk about the incompetence of the senior leadership in the police all day long, but who are they appointed by? They are appointed by the president, and then it filters down from there. Until we actually address that problem, then it's going to keep perpetuating itself. We are going to keep seeing increase in levels of crime. And on my last point, I remember having this conversation with someone years ago, a former colleague, that for all the talk of the 2010 World Cup, all the positives, etc., the one bad thing the 2010 World Cup did is actually show the rest of the world, who were basically quarter to turning a blind eye. The one thing that World Cup did is actually highlight that there is opportunity in South Africa, not just for those looking to do legitimate business, but for those who are looking to profit off the back of criminal and nefarious activity. That's why we've seen since around that World Cup an increase in crime stats that just hasn't been able to be arrested by the people at the top. And you'd think that if they were competent enough, they would see the emerging pattern and at the very least ask for help. But that is not exactly what socialist regimes are known for. They never ask for help. They make their own decisions. And when the decision failed, they bring out more policies to try to address previous policies which failed as well. It's a constant pattern that keeps repeating itself at the expense of the citizenry. And this is how you end up with a lawless society. Again, in my lifetime, I wouldn't want this to happen. But we've seen this happen elsewhere in the world, and we are basically doing a rinse and repeat or replaying the same music yet again. This is going to be yet another African country, sadly, if we don't do something about it in the next 24 months, I think.
Absolutely. And as it pains me. Nolu, I'm going to come to you. Dumo after that. It pains me, Nolu, because I had up on screen a moment ago. I'll put it up again now. Sexual offenses up 9.6%. And of course, when you unpack the various categories of crime under that, I mentioned them earlier on, what Dumo rightly said, we are on our own. Now let's compound that he refers to some of the more vulnerable individuals in our society, for instance, women. It baffles me how one can be umutas fazane, a woman in our society, when you know they are almost predator-like criminals who are literally watching, waiting for an opportunity to do something because they know. And Gideon said it early on, the chances even of them being caught, the chances of them being, firstly, the chances of them being stopped, the chances of them being caught when they commit a crime like that, very slim. Women in this country have to begin to take their own safety into their own hands. Getting a firearm, for instance, is one such perspective. Nolu, talk to me about your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Every time when I talk about this, I know that certain things I don't like it. Firstly, because the media, or rather people, tend to hike up on this whole thing of men are trash. So because unfortunately the way we are wired as women is that when one guy does something to me, it tends to taint off all other guys that are going to come before me after that. So that's number one. And then number two, I just think that I understand the gun, I understand the tasers and the pepper spray. I think for me, I'd love to see more men that are not trash, more men in our societies. For instance, let me just be practical. If you and me, Sihla, stay in the same unit and we are neighbors, and in that way, you don't want anything from me, but rather you know that I'll greet you and you'll greet me. Can I also start with like, hey, can you assist me by accompanying me to the, let's say, a taxi bus stop or whatever? Can I start relying on you as my neighbor, as a man, when you are a good man in my community, because you are in my community? Such things. Because we can't even do that as women in this country. Because I would think that you're a man who just goes to work, come back, and focus and mind your business. But the minute, therefore, I'll be like, you know what? Can you come into my house? I need help with this thing. My brain is thinking, if I let you in my house, that means that you might find a way to strangle me or do something. So it becomes difficult to create that relationship where you find that we can protect one another. Because protection is not just you only on your side as a man. I could give you an advice of a shady woman, something like that, because we also do funny things. But I know at this point we're focusing on women. So on a practical level, I'm saying, even myself, for instance, I've only met Usihle in this panel. I've never met Koketso no Dumo. I don't know if I were to come in or get into his car, what he might do to me. It comes into our brains all the time. And I just think that I'm not saying you should go around taking videos and talk about how great you are as a man, how protected you are as a man. No, no, no. I just say that, can you actualize it in that complex and be that kind of a guy when you just see us needing help? We might reject you. But the thing is this, when you model it out, those of us who've got the ear might come knocking at your door and of being of help. Notice, I didn't want to mention the government. I didn't want to make it too, big and all of that. But I just wanted to make it practical because I said to you, whenever we talk about this, it tends to make all men are bad. And for me, I know that not all men are bad. I'm saying that men who are good and of good stature, they need to start showing up, and be of protection. Lastly, as women, we need to find means that we can afford. First of all, let me put it like this. Did you know the three of you can stay in a township and survive? And I can't. Also, odds are it could be that you have more money than me, but I'll be forced to go and stay in a suburban area that I can't afford because I want my safety. And because I do that, that is why you'd find that I become even more vulnerable because now I might be short of money. Do you understand what I mean here? So because of that, that's why you find that as women, life in South Africa, it is difficult, no doubt about that. But on top of that, I'm saying to you, if our townships can get better, we can save a lot of money as women. Because when they are not, we tend to find ourselves in the most exorbitant amount of a lifestyle because we're trying to look for safety. For that matter, we don't even get that 100% of safety, even if I might stay at Val de Vie down the road, because guess what? My life will not center around the Val de Vie area, right? Even though it's insulated. By the way, Val de Vie is one of the areas here in Paarl. I'm insulated from all the problems of South Africa. I need to come out and go to work. I need to go and socialize. And because of that, that's why you find that becomes difficult. The gun thing, I know it's very, some of us may not afford it at this point. Getting a taser and a pepper spray, it might work for you. Learning how to kick somebody's balls, I know it can be effective as well, doing certain things that are practical, but most importantly, finding that one guy that you can greet who seems very decent, who can be of help to you if you're staying alone, and also creating those relationships. And I'm saying, man, please allow us to trust you again. Let me just put it like that.
I like that juxtaposition or that contrast, that catch-22 you raised, that a lot of women actually go through, and it's something which maybe we need to pick up in a separate conversation. It's this idea that you have women who live in townships recognizing their vulnerability to the everyday crime, the violent crime, the almost rape type sexual offenses crime, choose to leave those areas to live in so-called more affluent areas or in the suburbs, and then become vulnerable to another form of exploitation, if you will, which is because of their precarious financial situation, they then become vulnerable to guys who are predators in a different way, who offer up financial resources and in exchange can be just as sexually predatory, is that a word? Predatory, that's the word I'm looking for, as the overt violent rapist in a Lokshini. Interesting conversation, really something that should be unpacked as a sociological type conversation. But Dumo, let me come to you because there are other nested features that Nolu raised. And with that being said, a reminder to my audience, we're in the last 15 minutes of the show. We're unpacking the crime stats, discussing it from various perspectives with analysis by Dumo Denga, host of the Manpatria Show, Koketso Resane, co-host of the Manpatria Show, and of course, Nolu Maki of the Nolu Maki podcast. Find her on YouTube. Dumo, we often have this conversation almost offline, or we find each other in tweets when we have this part of who we are, I suppose, in a sense, as South African men. That sort of manosphere conversation, the idea that actually part of addressing the crime issue is really reinforcing masculinity in society, the idea that men are providers, protectors of those around them in a society like ours. Koketso, I know you and I agree on a lot of things in this particular direction. I'll come to you in a moment. But masculinity, Dumo, as an abstract topic on this conversation, something we need to talk about.
I agree, because the thing about it, like, when boys grow up and they don't have that guidance, and and they just grow up without it, they are more likely to be a delinquent in society because they never had that guidance. And I think it is true. It definitely is true, because I mean, some people have drawn parallels on why boys without fathers are more likely to join a gang, for example, because the gang leader becomes that father figure, because he gives instructions, he provides the guidance, he provides the stability. So therefore, they trust the gang leader. So it's actually important discussion to have, because could it be that the crime or crime in our situation or in our country can actually subside if we just take masculinity seriously, and also allow men to be men and encourage men to have purpose? Because you find that when men don't have purpose, it's crime, and they'll do more risky activities. You can go on Twitter and I saw this one video, and I'm not saying these guys didn't have fathers, but it just shows you the risk-taking behavior of men, where these men were doing crazy stunts. Like, there was this one stunt where a guy was driving, and then he hit like a rock, and then he jumped out of the car into another moving car. That type of thing. So men tend to do a lot of risky behaviors, even when they're bored and stuff like that. Now think about it. Now, when they don't have that guidance and everything like that, and they're looking for work, they're more likely going to do crime. And what is very sad, a lot of these people that get into crime, they just see that as normal work, because that's the only way they can get an income. To them, it's just work. And that is a very terrible situation to be in. So yes, definitely, I think the manosphere aspect of it is very important, because I think that if we take men seriously, and also the guidance of men very seriously, I do believe that you will see a lot of crime going down the tubes. And I do believe that part of the reason why we have high crime rates is because of a high fatherlessness rate. I do believe part of it plays a role. But I know the statists and those people who like social grants and, especially the child grants and everything, are going to lambaste me because of that. But the reality is that, look, ever since we introduced this policy, we've had more fatherless homes, and that has corresponded with increase in crimes. And it's a correlation. It's not. I'm not saying it's a causal relationship. It's a correlation, but it's so close that one could say that it is causal. But again, obviously, you'll be going on a limb there. So it's important, guys. For having a father, protecting masculinity and teaching men the right things will be the right way to go. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry for being so vehement on this, because I know, guys, we've had this conversation before, and Koketso, I must come to you, because we talk a lot about, what government should do, what the asshat Begicele should do to deal with crime, blah, blah, blah. But what are we doing? What are we doing as men? What are we doing as fathers? Because the first level of government in any society is the family. What are we doing as men to raise that young chap who's 21, pulling a knife on you, robbing you, and potentially going to jail? At some stage, he was a 10-year-old boy who could have been reached by us as amarazo, as we're called in townships, the older guys, to say, young man, tighten up there. Why are your pants sagging like that? Why is your shirt not tucked in? Why are your shoelaces not tied up? Why are you treating your girlfriend like this? Etc., etc. Various metrics that are social, but come together to create that young man who potentially later on becomes the criminal. You could have caught him in his formative years. That's a conversation of masculinity that needs to happen away from feminists, Koketso, to be brutally honest.
Yeah, I've said before that, the worst thing a man can do to his son is not be available. That's the absolute worst thing. And again, it goes down to how progressivism at large has really worked very hard over the past 2 decades to break down that family structure. And people bought into the narrative that family values are bad because they instill masculinity and they instill patriarchy, etc. One of the things that researchers have actually pointed out is that for all that has happened in the previous regime in South Africa, at the very least, where migrant work was a feature by design, at the very least, it gave mothers back home with their children out in the rural areas the ability to always bring the kids back in line by giving them the faint threat of when your father comes back, be it next week, be it at Easter, be it at Christmas, once a year, doesn't matter. That threat that a mother was able to use to bring the kids back in line meant something to the children. No one wanted to disappoint their father. And any child who has that kind of thinking will only ever have it to a father who is available. Now, why do I bring this up? Because there's, a lot of the messaging, again, is really preaching to the choir here. But the reality here is that you have men who are now in their 40s, 50s, etc., who are now senior family members or elders compared to teenage boys, that is. They are actually unable to speak into the lives of many of the youth. Why? How do you tell a younger man to do the right thing and get married before having children if you failed to do that yourself? How do you tell a young man to not spend his entire or large portions of his income? How do you tell a man to not spend large portions of his income on alcohol if that's exactly what you did every payday? How do you actually instill values in the next generation or 2 generations down, values that you yourself failed to uphold? Now, this goes back into African culture. It can be anywhere on the continent, and it's pretty much a very similar story. Take the ceremonial practice of lobola, for example. Lobola, mahadi, various words for essentially the same sort of thing. Initially, you have to be a married man yourself to actually preside over lobola negotiations. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, let's call it bride price. To preside over bride price negotiations between 2 families, you have to be a married man yourself. You cannot participate in something, or you cannot oversee something you never participated in years prior. You don't get to sit at the kraal during family events among the caucus of men if you are not a recognized man. And for that typically means you must be married. And there are some other things in there, such as you must have demonstrated the ability to maybe handle livestock, and you must be circumcised, etc. But that's the African principle there, that you must actually be validated as a man before we entrust you with the next generation. Now, what's since happened, again, a win to the progressives, that is, in the past 2-3 decades or so, is that they've taken all of that away. And in doing so, you can be philosophical about it as much as you like, but take away the nuance of philosophical or ideological debate and bring it back to the basics. No child is going to listen to an adult that they don't actually value is worth speaking into their life. In the same way, no mentee picks a mentor that they don't believe can actually mentor them. So that's the reality. I say this because children are clearly not listening to the adults, because they don't value the lessons given out by the adults. And it's through no fault of the child. It is because the adults themselves have actually failed to position themselves as people who are wiser, or simply put, people who know better. How do you listen to someone who's half the time drunk, who then wants to speak into your life about how you should conduct yourself in public and private? It's not going to happen. So as men, we have a scenario, or we have an accountability issue that we need to deal with. But much of the messaging goes to the choir. It doesn't go to the guy who's serving 20-year prison terms. It doesn't go to the guy who's been in a gang his whole life. It doesn't go to the guy who's been perpetuating domestic violence to his spouse for the past who knows how long. It's messaging that is delivered through mediums that you and I will consume. But again, you and I are not the people who need this message. The guy in the prison wall does. That
Absolutely.
deadbeat uncle who listens to no one does. So that's where the work needs to be done.
Absolutely. And sorry to cut to because to your point, Helen Duplessis in the comments is saying, can churches be doing more? Can schools be doing more? Can mosques be doing more? What are the sources of influence in our society for young people, whether it's young men or young women? Is it the family unit, which Koketso rightly points out, the last 2 decades, let's call it, of progressive ideology in this country has sought to break down, to weaken, to remove, to even cast as being a problem, the nuclear family, ubaba, umama, in the household. Cast these days as a problem somehow.
Can I make a point on that?
Are we seeing? Yeah, because.
So maybe to answer this very quickly, the reason why, yes, can churches, mosques, etc. be doing more? Yes, they can. The reason they are unable to be as effective as they were 40 years ago is because if you look at general town planning, again, in the previous regime, you couldn't plan, when town planning was done, there was also accommodation for a park, some form of recreational facility, and of course, a church. That was part of the fabric on how to develop and build a town from absolutely nothing. Right up there along with the main road, which would be called Church Street, Garrick Street, right? There was a reason it was called Church Street. There would be at least 2 churches on that very street in town planning of years gone by. You don't get that nowadays. You don't get the assurance from the municipality when they do zoning on, sections for religious institutions. Instead, in order to open up a church nowadays on a new town, you are effectively forced to privately buy the land and then do with that as you will. And of course, if the private buyer has designs on building an apartment complex over a church, then that's exactly what's going to happen. So again, right from the top, even the town planning doesn't accommodate churches, which would be best positioned to do some of this work because, that priority has been lost.
Absolutely. Guys, look, we're completely out of time. Let me do the last word from everybody on this issue, because for me, it's interesting. The last sort of 30% of the show began to delve into really the underlying sociological issues that feed the crime monster in this country, whereas the preceding sections had us talk about the structure of the state insofar as its response to the crime, the content of the crime itself, who are the criminals, the increasingly organized nature of it. So for you, dear viewer, just know that that's the sort of breakdown of how the show is. I'll try and do timestamps, pardon me, in the comment section after the show. Nolu, final word. As we look at these crime stats and we understand the overall picture, that South Africa is a completely unsafe country for the average citizen, as I like to say, the faith, flag, family, freedom type individual. Where to for us from here on forward?
Sure. I think I want to talk to women. There's no amount of money that can ever replace the need of a man, not just for your own pleasure as a woman, but also for your children. I'm saying this because I know that the issue also, the reason why crime is perpetuating is because we're the ones who are raising men as women. And because of that, we don't have, as Koketso said, there is no fear in our communities, because a boy child only understands one thing and one thing only, and that is fear. And that is actually quite important. And I'm saying that again, I don't care how much you might earn. Let me repeat it. There's no amount of money that can replace the need of a man, because when that boy grows, that child becomes very problematic, and they go beyond your own strength. So for me, I just want to say that, and also I say that because I know, as grown up as I am, I'm still scared of my dad. I'm still scared of my mom. So that is quite important. So I just want to hold it there. Thank you for having me, Sid.
As I realize I'm muted, Absolutely. Koketso, let me come to you, Baba. Final word. Same question. Where to from here? Because people listen to this conversation. Yes, it's nice and intellectual and blah blah blah, but we have families to look after. We have ourselves to look after. Where to from here?
Yeah, in one sentence, I would say do not delegate the raising of your children to the state. Never do that. Take it upon yourself to actually instill the values that have been slowly being taken out of the textbook and the curriculum, etc. So don't delegate that responsibility. Take it upon yourself to actually instill values into your offspring at the very least. And if enough people do this, we'll have a much better society 20 years from now. You planted the tree for tomorrow, not for today.
Absolutely. As I listen to Koketso there, again, it comes back to that idea, as I said at the beginning of this particular segment. Guys, the first layer, the first level of government in any society is the family unit. There is nothing a politician or a statist individual or a government official can do for your children, for you as an individual, for you as families, that you shouldn't be doing for yourselves. Dumo, as we wrap up this crime conversation, its broad nature now really beginning to blossom. Final word. Families, where are we? What do we do? Not families, pardon me. As South Africans, what do we do? You said it yourself. We're on our own. What does that mean for us?
Yeah, so people should not be discouraged by that. It's actually a liberating response. The reality is that, yes, we all are on our own, but that means that now you can implement good and innovative ideas to enhance security. So, speak to people about it, speak to people within your community and so forth, and see what solutions you can come up with. And that's the first place to start. And you'll be surprised, how much you can actually achieve with a few people and what ideas you can actually come up with. Maybe you can do it alone. Maybe you can be very smart and, I don't know, create some, AI security system that's got automated turrets and alarms and everything like that. Maybe you can, and if you're that smart, great. But if you're not super smart, speak to people within your community, see what you can get done, and trust me, you'll be surprised at what you can actually achieve.
Absolutely. There's no other two ways about that. That, of course, is Dumo Denga, host of the Manpatria show. Guys, we've completely run out of time. Let me thank every single one of you. I did get an opportunity to put your details on screen. Shout out to La Solace for doing exactly that. Let me just say thank you and goodbye to my guests, and thank you and goodbye to you. Can I please take a moment to have a final word here? Because there's something to be said about, I joke a lot about, the asshat police minister and inept South African police service. But this last bit of the conversation was actually quite important. Dumo is absolutely right. You're on your own, but don't view that as a statement of fear or that should elicit fear. It should be a statement of hope. It should be a statement that enables you, that says you, or rather that prompts you to act. And for me, I've always said it. And I don't care what the lefties say. I don't care what the bleeding heart progressives say. Part of taking responsibility of your security, if you're going to live in South Africa, if you, as a South African, are to endure in this country, indeed prosper in this country, step one, get licensed, get training, continue training, and have a defensive mindset, a mindset that says, I will protect. I am primarily responsible for my life, my liberty, and my property rights. And by extension, because I'm empowered in that way, as someone who can smite evil in the moment, who can respond to evil in the moment, you're protecting not only yourself, but your family and your community. And it's that basis, on that basis rather, that I often say, band together with your community members, know your neighbors, know the people around you, the people who form the ecosystem of your neighborhood, because it's those people, when it's crunch time, who'll be there to help you fend off the wolves of society, the criminals of society, whether they are a criminal elite or the petty criminal, it's irrelevant. You are your own first responder. So as we saw those crime stats, that is my final word on this. That's my 2 cents, if you will. And I'll admit one thing as a final gasp. I myself don't have my gun license yet. And it's a source of shame. And it's something because of that, which I'll be focusing on this year. And I've mentioned this before, I'll be working with IHAU Training Center, which is based here in Durban in Pinetown. I'll take you on the process. I'll put it on a show and show you what it is to go through that process of acquiring your gun license. So look out for that as some of the content that we'll be doing this year. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for this excellent stream. A big thanks to all my guests once again. Remember, guys, as you head out, please do me that solid favor. Hit that like button. It really does help spread the reach of the show, including, of course, subscribing to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. And find us, of course, at our website at bigdaddyliberty.com. With that being said, enjoy this new week, another new week of Buganazo, our morning news analysis show every morning every weekday morning, from 7 a.m. Look out for tomorrow's show as we unpack a few things. That's Vuganazo on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. With that being said, what a mouthful. With that being said, remember, as I like to say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.